An overly comfortable, slightly worn living room. Evening. A low-budget action movie flickers silently on the large, expensive TV. The only light comes from the screen and the kitchen, where a takeout container sits open on the counter. Everything is too calm. The moment she stepped through the door, I didn't feel rage or betrayal or even panic. I felt a kind of deep, cold, perfect clarity. You know how when you're watching a movie and the director uses a special effect to make the world seem quiet, while the music swells with impending doom? That's what it was like. Her presence, the noise, the casualness, it was a sound I could hear but I wasn't listening. I was observing the stillness beneath it. No, Julia smiled. That wide, practiced, I've got nothing to hide smile she only wore when she had everything to hide. It was too bright for a Tuesday night. Too much teeth. Hey babe, she called out, tossing her keys onto the ceramic dish by the door with a loud, deliberate clatter. Like it was any other Tuesday. Like the foundations of our world weren't currently shifting beneath her brightly painted sneakers. You would have laughed, she continued, her voice light, airy, practiced. A little too loud. The new instructor at the gym is a total maniac. We were doing mountain climbers for like 10 minutes straight. I think I might actually be dying. I looked up from the couch. The remote was resting in my hand. A silent, useless weapon. The TV was flickering with some late-night rerun. A sitcom I'd seen 100 times. I wasn't watching the show. I was watching her. She was glowing. But not from sweat. Not from effort. She was glowing from performance. Her hair was perfect. Not a single strand out of place, defying gravity and exertion. Her makeup, untouched, flawlessly applied, as if she'd just put it on. There wasn't a drop of exertion clinging to her. No telltale flush of a cardio session. Her gym bag, the expensive olive green one I'd bought her last Christmas, it was by the door, untouched, right where it had been all evening. Not even slightly rumpled. Prop. But I said nothing. The lie was too heavy, too complete, to challenge with a simple question. It felt almost beautiful in its audacity. Smells like you ordered Thai, she said, bending to pull off her shoes. A slow, sensual motion she often used, another piece of the performance. Let me guess. Extra peanuts on the pad thai and no chili flakes. Am I right? She winked. That casual, intimate wink that used to melt me. Now it felt like a disguise. Still I didn't answer. I just watched her. Every move, every word, every subtle flicker of her eyes as she searched mine for a reaction. I let her fill the room with noise, with small talk, with the sweet, familiar rhythm of our domestic life, while I listened to everything she wasn't saying. She walked into the kitchen like she owned the silence I was keeping, like it was hers to manage. Don't look at me like that, she said, laughing lightly as she opened the fridge, scanning for a drink. I know you think I'm obsessed with this new gym routine, but hey, a girl's got to keep it tight, right? That's when I finally tilted my head. Just a little. Like I was thinking. Like I was curious. But I wasn't. I was collecting. Every word, every motion, every casual glance she threw over her shoulder to gauge my mood. It all felt like a script she'd rehearsed in her car, checking her lines in the rearview mirror, perfecting the delivery. I swear it's like the more I go, the more energy I have. You should come with me sometime. My eyes flicked to the gym bag again. Unspoken. Undisturbed. I didn't even nod. I just blinked, breathed, and let the silence stretch. I was waiting for her to break it, not because I was mad, but because her effort was exhausting me. She finally grabbed a fork and joined me on the couch, picking through the leftover noodles like she'd earned them. You always know what to order. That fake domestic sweetness used to fool me. I used to take these moments, the food, the couch, her warm body close, as proof. Proof that we were okay. Proof that we were still us. Not anymore. Now it felt like camouflage. A false calm draped over something slowly, steadily rotting beneath the surface. You're quiet, she said after a while, chewing slowly, finally addressing the elephant I was riding. Everything okay? I turned to her, met her eyes and smiled. A soft, gentle smile, the kind that disarmed people. Yeah, I said softly. Everything's fine. And that was the first lie I told her. Because everything had already started unraveling, and she didn't even feel the thread slipping. I'm Noah. I'm 33. I write back-end code for an accounting firm. I live in polos and hoodies. I don't make waves. I'm the guy people underestimate. But I see everything. I see the dependencies, the loopholes, the hidden architecture that makes a system run. Or, in this case, the cracks that make it fail. Our house was modest. Stucco exterior, sun-faded shutters, a dusty green lawn that needed more water than I was willing to give it. We weren't flashy. We were the couple who remembered birthdays, argued over streaming subscriptions, made grocery lists and stuck to them. And for a long time I thought that meant we were safe. We had a system. Then Julia started changing her schedule. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, insidious creep. A new gym membership. A new routine. A new scent, muskier, darker, that I didn't recognize on her skin when she came home late. It was a subtle signal, a single misaligned bite in the code of our marriage. But still I didn't ask. I didn't accuse. I waited. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Surveillance. And I wasn't planning to confront her. Not yet. I was planning to watch her unravel herself. You'd be amazed at how much truth slips through the cracks when you stop filling the silence. When you stop helping the liar maintain the lie. The next day, I didn't ask where she was going. Just a simple nod when she grabbed her keys and kissed my cheek. A dry, quick press of the lips. Boot camp again, she announced, already halfway out the door. Back by 8. Her tone was cheerful, borderline rehearsed. Like she'd practiced it in the mirror, testing the pitch. Was this casual enough? So I just smiled and said, "Have fun." Then I watched her drive away. 5 minutes later, I slipped on a hoodie, grabbed my keys and followed. I didn't tail her like a movie detective. No sunglasses. No stealth driving. Just enough distance to see where she went. I'm a programmer, remember? I believe in simple, efficient data collection. And there it was, the gym. Platinum Fitness Center. She pulled in, parked, and walked through the front doors like she belonged. A regular. I waited across the street, engine idling, fingers tapping the steering wheel. After 20 minutes, I drove home. I had confirmed the location, the starting time. Phase 1 complete. That night she came back glowing. "We did circuit training today. I'm going to feel it tomorrow," she groaned, stretching her arms above her head, subtly showcasing her toned stomach. He nodded. "Nice." The next day, same drill. Day after that, rinse, repeat. Julia was, by all appearances, a model of health and dedication. The gym staff waved. She scanned in, worked out, left. But something still itched at the edge of my mind. Not about where she was going, but why she was going so much. There was a rhythm to it. Too polished. By clockwork. She left always around the same time. Wore the same outfit rotation. Gave me the same breezy goodbye. Always back before 8. Then Thursday rolled around. I didn't follow her this time. I stayed home, laid on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan. I gave her 30 minutes, the time it would take to get there, check in and get settled. Then I went to the front door. Checked the bag. It was still empty. No damp towel. No change of clothes. Not even a half-used stick of deodorant. Just a water bottle, full, and a folded flyer from the gym's opening week. Pristine. Unread. That night she came home flushed again. You should have seen how packed it was. Everyone's jumping on this New Year fitness craze. Smiled. Makes sense. The next week passed in a blur of routine and quiet tension. Julia kept going to the gym. 6 out of 7 nights. Always the same lines. Always the same quick kiss at the door. But I'd stopped following her. Instead I watched from inside. Every exit. Every entrance. The weight of her lies pressed heavier each time she crossed that threshold like nothing was wrong. And still I said nothing. One night, as she brushed past me in a rush, fumbling with her keys and that useless gym bag, I caught her scent. Not sweat. Not even body spray. Cologne. Not mine. Something muskier, darker. Something designed to linger in the quiet space between her own perfume and the fake scent of exertion. "Late?" I asked casually, not even looking up from my book, my heart rate steady, my voice flat. She froze mid-motion. "Yeah," she said after a beat, her voice slightly higher than before. "Class started 10 minutes ago." Then she was gone. I didn't move for a full minute. Just stared at the same word on the page I hadn't turned in 20 minutes. It wasn't proof, not in a legal sense. But it was enough. It was the missing piece of data that completed the equation. Fact 1. She is going to the gym location, verified. Fact 2. She is not exercising, verified by the pristine bag. Fact 3. She is encountering a masculine scent, verified by the cologne. Conclusion. The gym is the alibi. The lie is the meeting. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan. The blade spun like a slow metronome, keeping time with a new rhythm inside me. Deliberate. At 2:13 a.m. I picked up my phone. There was only one person I could call. The one person who was close enough to see the cracks but far enough away to still feel guilty. Julia's younger sister. She'd always been around. Family barbecues, holidays, birthdays. A sweet girl, mid-20s, freshly graduated, still finding her footing. She used to smile easily around us. Lately, she'd been avoiding eye contact. I figured she knew something, and I was done pretending I didn't. A retro diner late at night. Red vinyl booths, dim lighting. The only sound is a crackling jukebox playing a dusty old love song. It was a Wednesday night when I texted Emma. "You free for coffee? Just wanna talk." She replied in under a minute. Tomorrow night. Bae. We agreed on a diner halfway between her apartment and mine. One of those retro spots with red vinyl booths, sticky laminate tables, and a jukebox that only played Elvis and Heartbreak. The perfect setting for a difficult confession. Got there first. I chose a booth near the back, quiet, dimly lit. I ordered a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink and just stared out the window as the rain began to mist the glass. The city lights refracted into blurry streaks of yellow and red. I felt like I was watching my life through a wet, dirty pane of glass, just waiting for the distortion to clear. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Emma had always been light. Her laugh, her presence, the nervous energy in her step. But now she looked pale, her movements hesitant. Her smile when she offered it was thin, like stretched paper. She spotted me, hesitated for a moment, then came over and slid into the booth across from me. "Noah," she said softly, my name cracking a little, like she was afraid to speak it too loud. "Thanks for coming," I replied, giving her a small, controlled nod. She fidgeted immediately, her eyes dropping to the paper napkin in front of her. She started folding it into tiny geometric shapes. Her hands wouldn't stay still. The anxiety radiating off her was almost physical. I didn't rush her. We made small talk at first. About her new job, her apartment, the sudden shift in the weather. Nothing important. It felt like standing at the edge of a frozen lake, testing the ice with my toe, waiting for the right moment to step out. Finally, I couldn't stand the performance anymore. I had to plunge in. "Emma," I said, leaning forward slightly. My voice was steady and low, cutting through the low hum of the jukebox. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Not the family version. The real one." Her fingers froze mid-fold. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet mine. They were wide, scared. "It's about Julia," I added, holding her gaze. Emma's throat moved visibly as she swallowed hard. "Okay," she whispered. I didn't look away. I didn't soften my tone. "Is she seeing someone?" The napkin trembled in her hand. "I don't need names," I added quickly, anticipating the automatic defense. "I'm not trying to trap you, Emma. I just want the truth. I need to know what I'm fighting, or if I should stop fighting at all." She stared at me, her face pale, like she was weighing something impossible, the loyalty to her sister against her own quiet, decent conscience. Her lower lip quivered. "Noah, I didn't want to be in the middle of this," she pleaded. "You already are," I said gently but firmly. "And I think you hate it." Silence. The diner's jukebox clicked, and another dusty old love song about betrayal and regret hummed through the speakers. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Emma took a shaky breath, finally breaking. "I don't know who, I swear I never saw his face," she confessed, her voice barely audible, thick with shame. "But yeah, she is." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just let the two simple words, "she is," land. It was the confirmation I'd spent weeks avoiding, yet also the one thing I needed to move forward. "I found out a few weeks ago," she continued, scrambling to get the words out. "She was texting someone during a family dinner. Real sneaky. Then later I saw her outside arguing on the phone. She said something like, 'You promised me Thursday nights.' She didn't know I heard. A wave of understanding, cold and sharp, washed over me. The new instructor, the boot camp, the unused gym bag. It wasn't a schedule. It was a standing appointment. I closed my eyes briefly, nodding once. Emma looked panicked now. "Please don't tell her I told you. Please, Noah." She cut me off. "She already doesn't trust me." I met her eyes. "This stays between us." She nodded instantly, desperately, like she'd been waiting for that assurance all night. The waitress came by with the check, but neither of us reached for it. The transaction was already complete. Emma wiped her eyes quickly with the sleeve of her jacket. "You don't deserve this," she said softly, her voice full of genuine sorrow. You're good to her." I smiled, but the warmth didn't reach my eyes. "Sometimes being good just makes you easier to lie to." She winced like the words hurt her physically. I slid out of the booth and stood up. "Thanks for the coffee, Emma." She didn't speak. She just watched me. I didn't look back. Had the data. The objective was complete. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the pavement still shimmered under the orange streetlights. I got into my car, sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel hurt. Felt calm. Resolved. I didn't need to chase her anymore because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a devastating but useful truth. That night, I didn't do what the old me would have done. No checking her phone when she was in the shower. No logging into our shared cloud. No skimming her browser history for clues. I was done with surveillance. I sat in bed, reading the same sentence in a book I didn't care about. I heard the water running, the soft pad of her feet on the tile, the low hum she always made when applying moisturizer. None of it moved me anymore. When Julia finally slid into bed beside me, she whispered a cheerful night, and turned off the light. She drifted off in minutes. Her breathing slowed, rhythmic and soft, peaceful, like the guilt hadn't touched her at all. I stared up at the ceiling. No tension in my jaw. No ache in my chest. Just stillness. It wasn't numbness. It was clarity. The kind of stillness that precedes a controlled demolition. The next day, I didn't pretend things were normal. I didn't wait for her to lie again. I didn't scan her eyes for cracks. Instead, I made a call to an old friend, Josh. Josh ran a little bar downtown, tucked between a barbershop and a defunct music store. The kind of place with bad lighting, good whiskey, and zero pressure. The kind of place where you could say nothing and still be understood. "You alive?" he asked when I walked in, slapping me on the back with enough force to make me stumble. "Barely," I said, a faint smile touching my lips. "Buy me a drink so I can fake it." We sat in the back, surrounded by chipped tables and the low hum of someone butchering classic rock on the jukebox. Josh didn't pry. He just handed me a double whiskey and nodded like he knew enough already, without needing the details. I didn't drag Julia's name into it. I didn't give him the messy specifics. All I said was, "Been thinking about what happens when something you built starts falling apart, and you realize you're not angry anymore." He looked at me sideways, taking a thoughtful sip of his own drink. "That sounds worse than anger." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the most honest sound I'd made in months. "It is. Anger is an energy. This is just cold physics." We talked about everything but marriage. Old memories. Stupid college bets. The time we almost got arrested for sneaking into the municipal pool at 3 a.m. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. It was a release. A moment of remembering who I was before I became just Julia's husband. And when I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel empty. Felt weightless. Julia was already asleep when I got home. Or she pretended to be. She stirred a little as I walked in, her voice groggy, laced with feigned concern. "You were out late." "Yeah," I said simply, pulling off my jacket. She paused, waiting for the elaboration that used to be automatic. "With who?" "Josh," I replied, opening the closet, not even looking at her. Another bead of silence. Then the expected, slightly defensive probe. "You didn't tell me you were going out." I turned around, met her eyes across the dimly lit room. "You don't tell me a lot of things either." She blinked, just once. Then she turned her face to the wall, curling deeper under the covers, ending the conversation. I laid beside her without touching her. No tension. No fireworks. Just silence. But this time it was mine. And it was deafening. The law office was on the 6th floor of a narrow brick building downtown. The kind that had probably been repurposed from something older, something forgotten, just like a lot of things in my life lately. Took the stairs. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to feel the weight in my legs. Maybe I didn't want to arrive too quickly. I needed the gravity of the decision to sink in with every upward step. The receptionist greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Gave my name. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a man in a gray suit named Mitchell Green, who looked like he'd seen too many marriages crumble to care anymore. Mr. Carter, he said, extending a hand. I understand you're looking to file. He nodded. I am. He didn't flinch. Just opened a file folder, pulled out a legal pad, and clicked his pen. Tell me everything. And so I did. Not all at once. Not with fire or fury, but in pieces. Measured. Controlled. The gym story. Changed routines. The fake smiles. The conversation with Emma. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just gave him the bones, the hard data, and let the silence between the words speak for the rest of the rot. When I was done, he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and studied me over the top of them. There's no concrete proof of the affair, he said plainly. Nothing digital. No photos, texts, call logs. No suspicion of financial misconduct, hidden accounts, anything material. Nothing I can prove. He sighed through his nose. So, it's all circumstantial. I'm not trying to crucify her, I said. I just want out. Quietly. Cleanly. He raised an eyebrow. Even split. For now, I replied. Just file the papers. He nodded. I can draft them this week. You'll need to sign here. He slid the initial petition form across the desk. I didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. Pen met paper, and I signed my name with a stillness I hadn't felt in months. Noah Carter. That sound, pen on parchment, slow and final, was the loudest noise I'd heard all day. When I handed the folder back, Mitchell gave me a long look. You're remarkably composed. Shrugged. I already broke. This is just the rebuild. He smiled faintly at that. Not kindly, not mockingly. Just knowingly. We shook hands. I took the elevator this time. When I stepped out into the sunlit sidewalk, I didn't feel liberated. Not yet. But I felt direction. The strange thing about grief is how it disguises itself as routine. I'd been living in the ruins, calling it home. Now I was done dusting off broken furniture and pretending it still worked. The house, immediately following the signing of the papers. The atmosphere is tense, thick with unspoken finality. The lighting in the house is flat and neutral. Back at the house, I found Julia folding laundry on the bed, humming something tuneless, a soft, mindless sound. She glanced up when I walked in, her movements still conveying that practiced domestic ease. You were out early, she said. Yeah. With Josh again, she probed, trying to find the familiar, comfortable groove of our old conversations. No. She waited for me to offer more, the details, the reason, the location. I didn't. I gave her only the barest sliver of information, the truth reduced to a cold, unusable fragment. She held up one of my shirts. Want this hung or folded? Doesn't matter, I said, my voice flat, brushing past her into the bathroom. The faucet ran, the mirror fogged, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a man desperately trying to hold everything together. I saw someone letting go. The emotional effort I had exerted for months, the doubt, the searching, the internal monitoring, was suddenly completely absent. She noticed it during dinner. It wasn't what I said. It was what I didn't. The way I passed the salt without looking up. The way I chewed slowly, deliberately, as if tasting something for the first time, but not caring if I liked it. I was present, but utterly unreachable. Julia set her fork down halfway through her salad, the clink of metal on ceramic sounding ridiculously loud in the small dining room. You're different, she stated, her voice careful, laced with a testing caution. I didn't glance up. How so? You're distant. I wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin. I'm tired. She scoffed. The word wasn't good enough. It didn't account for the magnitude of my emotional retreat. Tired of what? I finally looked at her. My expression was calm, open, and utterly devoid of warmth. Everything. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. Clean. Like a scalpel cutting through the last fibers of a conversation we used to know how to have. She shifted in her seat, discomfort radiating off her. Are we really doing this? She asked, her voice laced with a subtle challenge. The cold shoulder game. This isn't a game, Julia, I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper. Not to me. I stood, collected the plates, and walked them to the sink. She didn't move, just sat there, blinking slowly like someone trying to wake up from a deep, confusing dream. Her control was starting to slip, replaced by a dull, generalized fear. Later, she followed me into the living room. The TV was still on, muted, the flickering light casting shadows that seemed to emphasize the chasm between us. "You haven't touched me in over a week," she said, her voice dropping to a softer, more intimate tone, the tone of attempted repair. I didn't look away from the TV. "You haven't spoken to me honestly in over a month." Her arms folded, jaw tight. "This thing you're doing, this act, it's not you." I turned the volume down. The noise was distracting. "You don't get to tell me who I am anymore." She looked genuinely stunned. Like those words had reached a part of her she didn't know was still vulnerable. She was losing her claim on my identity, and she hated the feeling of losing authorship. "I don't know what happened," she whispered, the defensive anger briefly replaced by genuine confusion. "No." I turned to face her fully now. "'Cause I think you do. I think you've known for a long time. But you assumed I'd stay quiet forever." Her lips parted but nothing came out. The usual, quick denial was caught in her throat. I stood, walked past her, and headed toward the bedroom. She followed, desperate to stop the procession to silence. "I made mistakes." "Okay," she said quickly, walking behind me. "But we've both been off lately. Maybe we can still fix this." I turned at the doorway, holding the frame with one hand, bracing myself. "You're not scared of losing me," I stated, my gaze boring into her. "You're scared of losing control of me." Her mouth opened again. A sharp inhale, but no denial came. We stared at each other across the hallway, separated by only a few feet, but miles of emotional distance. "You don't mean that," she said finally, shaking her head. "I didn't," I replied. "But I do now." I shut the door. Not slammed it, but closed it with a soft, conclusive click. She didn't knock. The next morning was quieter than usual. No morning banter. No questions about the day ahead. Just 2 mugs of coffee made in silence. The only sound in the kitchen was the delicate clink of spoons. When she handed me mine, I didn't say thank you. She didn't ask why. She just retreated. At the door, I paused to grab my keys. Julia stood behind me in her robe, arms crossed, the anxiety now visible in the way she held herself. "Will you be home late again?" "Probably." She tilted her head, trying to find the familiar battleground. "Another Josh night." I looked at her long enough to let the pause speak louder than any lie she could construct. Then, maybe. And I walked out. No kiss, no goodbye. Just the sound of the lock clicking into place and her breath catching as she stood there alone. She was realizing the worst part wasn't that I was leaving. It was that she no longer had the power to stop me. She didn't leave the house that evening, or the next. By day 3, her excuses for skipping the gym started stacking up like unread mail. "I've got a headache. I think I'm catching something. Too tired tonight. Maybe tomorrow." She still wore her gym leggings. Still put her hair up like she was heading out. But the front door stayed shut. And I stopped asking. The silence between us thickened. It wasn't tension anymore. Not the kind that begged for a release. It was something else entirely. Surrender. She moved slower through the house. Kept checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. Always quickly setting it face down every time I walked by. Her smile, once a weapon she used to control the room, had dulled, muted, almost scared. One night, as I stood at the sink washing dishes, she appeared behind me, pretending to grab a glass. "You've been off," she said carefully, eyes on the cupboard. I rinsed a plate. "So have you." She didn't push further. She just filled the glass halfway, drank it slowly, and left the room. But I saw the way her hands shook as she held the glass. The veneer was cracking under the weight of my indifference. Later that night, I sat alone at the edge of the bed. The house was dark except for a sliver of hallway light leaking in through the crack under the door. Her side of the bed was empty. She'd fallen asleep on the couch again, or pretended to. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the diner conversation with Emma. I hadn't spoken to her since, but the way Julia had suddenly stopped going to the gym didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like reaction, so I called Emma again. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately guarded. "Noah, I need to ask you something," I said. "And I need you to be honest with me. Fully this time." She sighed on the other end, a sound of exhausted resignation. "I figured this was coming. Did you tell her we talked?" Long pause. The sound of her shifting, gathering her words. "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice tight with regret. "She kept pressing me. Said she could tell something was wrong. She caught me flinching when she mentioned you. I didn't even say anything specific, but she knew. My jaw clenched, a small, tight knot of confirmation. And now? Emma's voice grew quiet, almost a whisper. She said it's over. The affair. She told me 2 days ago. Swore she ended it just like that. I think she's scared, Noah. Not of losing you. Of you not reacting. Of you not caring. I exhaled slowly. She's right to be scared. Emma hesitated. I'm sorry. I know this is. I'm really sorry. She started to say something else, but I hung up. There wasn't anything left to hear. I sat in the dark for a long time, phone resting in my palm. Somewhere in the hallway, a floorboard creaked. I didn't look up. When I finally crawled under the covers, she wasn't there. And for once, I didn't feel the absence. I felt the alignment. She wasn't where she wanted to be, and I wasn't where she expected me to be. That was the new equation. The kitchen, morning. Julia is attempting to prepare a nostalgic, picture-perfect breakfast. The atmosphere is fragile, the silence between them is hostile, and in the morning, Julia was back to making breakfast. Pancakes. Just like she used to years ago, before the routine became rote and the smiles became masks. She hummed a soft tune, one I vaguely recognized from the early days, before everything soured. She brought a plate to the table, set it in front of me with delicate care, a golden stack perfectly centered. Then she smiled, a conscious effort to project the image of a suburban painting come to life. But I didn't touch the food. You're not hungry? She asked, the forced cheerfulness in her voice brittle, ready to snap. I looked at her flatly, a cold, empty stare that acknowledged the effort but rejected the premise. You don't have to pretend anymore. She blinked, the smile faltering. What's that supposed to mean? You already know I know. So stop trying to win me back with butter and syrup. Her smile collapsed. The carefully constructed image shattered, replaced instantly by the defensive anger she always defaulted to. You haven't said anything, she snapped, a hint of desperation in the challenge. And you haven't denied anything. We stared at each other across the table. For a moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity for how pale she looked, how tight her grip was on the fork she hadn't used. But then I remembered she was only pale because the power she once held was finally out of her hands. You ended it. I asked a direct clinical question. Her jaw tightened. Yes. And you regret it. She opened her mouth, ready to launch into the automatic answer. I raised a hand, stopping her before the lie could form. Wait. Let me rephrase. Did you end it because you realized what you did was wrong, or because you realized you don't control me anymore? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The long-waited silence was the only confession I required. I stood, walked past her and grabbed my coat. I'm not playing house anymore, I said as I opened the door. Noah, she called after me, her voice suddenly small, pleading. Please just talk to me. I looked over my shoulder. Cold. We're past talking. And I left her there, standing in the doorway, still holding a fork she never used and a lie she could no longer manage. The next morning, she tried a different, more intimate tactic. She brought me breakfast in bed. Scrambled eggs, toast, strawberries, everything arranged with care. She even sprinkled cinnamon on the coffee, the exact way I used to like it, a tiny poignant detail pulled from a happier, safer past. I stared at the tray, then at her. Julia stood there with a brightness in her eyes that didn't match the weight in the room. Thought I'd surprise you, she whispered, forcing a hopeful smile. I didn't move. You did. You haven't eaten properly in days, she continued, pushing through my indifference. I figured. I cut her off with a look. Cold. Measured. Why the sudden concern? Her smile faltered, the light dimming. Because I care. I always have. I finally sat up, letting the blanket fall. Then maybe you should have remembered that before climbing into someone else's routine. Her mouth opened, but I could already see the defensive fight rising in her throat. That's not fair, she said sharply. What isn't? I asked, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. That I finally see things clearly. You're acting like I'm the only one who ever did anything wrong. I emotionally checked out long before I did anything physical, she snapped, desperate to shift the balance of blame. You stopped paying attention. You were always working, always quiet. So that gave you permission. No, she barked, her voice rising in genuine frustration. It gave me reasons. I stood now, fully facing her, my height suddenly an advantage. Then say it, I challenged, my voice low and dangerous. Say you chose to cheat because I didn't clap loud enough when you entered the room. She flinched. Then she stepped forward, her voice lowered, contrite. I made a mistake. But I ended it. I'm trying to fix things. You're trying to manage things, I corrected her, quiet but firm. You're not sorry. You're scared. That's not true. You're terrified that I don't need you anymore. That I'm not fighting you. That I'm not even angry. Her eyes shimmered now, wet with unshed tears, but no tears fell. I am sorry. I stepped closer. And I believe you're sorry that I caught on. She turned away, hands pressed to her face, pacing the room like she was trying to trap the pieces of herself before they fell apart. This doesn't have to be the end, she muttered, not to me, but to the room. We can work through this. People do it all the time. I watched her with a calm she clearly couldn't understand. You don't get it, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed again. This is the end. You're just the last one to notice. She spun around, fury lighting her face, her ultimate weapon. You think this makes you righteous? You walking around like some saint while I break down trying to salvage something? No, I said evenly. I think this makes me done. The room went still. Her chest heaved with shallow, frantic breaths. The tray of breakfast sat untouched on the bed between us, the eggs going cold, the strawberries already softening. You're punishing me, she said suddenly, a moment of raw insight piercing the performance. That's what this is. You want me to suffer. I stood, walked to the dresser, and opened the drawer. Calm hands, focused, collecting a shirt. I want you to feel the silence you handed me for months, I said. The same silence I drowned in while you played pretend. She stepped closer again, reaching for my arm. You don't mean it. You're just hurt. I pulled away, smoothly, without violence. I'm not hurt, Julia. Healed. That's what you can't stand. Her expression twisted, shifting between disbelief and desperation. So what now? You just walk away. No, I said quietly. You will. That cracked her. You're unbelievable, she hissed, voice shaking. You act like you've been the victim this whole time, but you're cold. You're cruel. No, I said again. I'm just not in love with you anymore. And the second those words hit the air, I saw something in her break. Not the dramatic collapse she wanted me to react to. Not a storm of apologies or tears. Just the truth. That her grip on this narrative was gone. That I wasn't playing anymore. We stood there in silence. Two people on opposite sides of something we couldn't rebuild. Then, without a word, she turned and left the room. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway. A door slammed, the guest room door, and I sat down beside the untouched tray, took one sip of the cinnamon coffee, savoring the bittersweet memory of what the gesture used to mean, then dumped the rest in the sink. The living room late night. Noah is sitting on the couch, the TV muted. The room is heavy with the aftermath of the morning's confrontation. Julia enters, attempting to use nostalgia as a weapon. That night, she tried one last card. The card of physical memory. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels without watching anything. The silence was back, but now it felt like a force field around me, protecting me from her presence. I heard her footsteps behind me. Low. Deliberate. The sound of someone trying to create an atmosphere. I didn't turn. Then her hand touched my shoulder. Light, soft fingers brushing down my arm. I felt her lean in. The scent of her perfume, the same one she wore on our first anniversary, floated around me like some desperate manufactured memory. You remember this, she whispered, her voice soft, almost girlish, designed to evoke a past passion. You used to love when I wore this. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the meaningless flicker of the screen. She moved around the couch, lowering herself beside me. Too close. Her knees touching mine, an old intimacy she was trying to force back into existence. She placed her hand on my thigh, ran it up slowly, and offered a careful, seductive smile. "I miss us," she said. "I miss the way you looked at me." I looked at her now. But it wasn't the way she meant. It was the kind of look you give a door you're about to walk through and never open again. My eyes were clear, acknowledging her, but seeing only the mechanism of her manipulation. Her smile faded just a bit, sensing the barrier. "Don't you miss it too?" Understood. Just like that. No warning. The sudden movement broke the intimate bubble she was trying to create. I took a step back, separating my energy from hers. "I don't," I said plainly. Her expression cracked. Her breath hitched, catching on the sudden crushing weight of the negation. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said slowly, deliberately, letting the words land with precision. "You don't attract me anymore." It landed like a physical blow. Her breath caught. "Excuse me." I met her eyes. Clear. "There's nothing in you that draws me now. Not physically, not emotionally. You've hollowed it all out." She stood too, the fire rushing back into her face. The primal rejection was too much for her control. "How dare you?" I tilted my head, perfectly composed. "Funny, you didn't ask that when you were lying to me every night." She stepped closer, eyes wild. "I made mistakes, but I was trying to fix." "No," I cut in. "You were performing. And now the stage is empty. And you don't know who you are without an audience." That did it. Her hand shot out, shoving me hard in the chest. A sharp, impulsive reaction born of pure, frustrated desperation. "You're cruel," she hissed. "Colder than I ever was." I didn't move. Didn't raise my voice. I took the shove and held my ground, letting the physical act highlight her loss of control, not mine. "You lost me a long time ago, Julia," I said. "This is just the moment you noticed." We didn't speak for the rest of the night. She retreated to the guest room, and I didn't feel a single thing when I heard her sobbing into the pillow. No vindication, no pity. Just completion. 2 days passed. No small talk. No more soft pleas or half-hearted attempts at repair. Just two people circling the wreckage of something long dead, pretending not to smell the smoke. It was a Saturday morning, bright, warm, peaceful. One of those early fall days where the light makes everything look kinder than it really is. I was in the kitchen, buttering toast, coffee brewing quietly behind me when she walked in. Her face was set. Lipstick too red. Is too dry. A mask of defiant strength. She dropped a stack of papers on the table with a loud, aggressive slap. "I'm done playing games," she said. I turned slowly, glanced at the title page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Name. Her signature. She crossed her arms, ready for the battle she thought she was initiating. "You think you're the only one who can end things. Fine. You want cold. I can be cold." I studied her face. The shake in her jaw. The way her left eye twitched. This wasn't strength. It was a brittle last-ditch swing to reclaim the power she no longer had. I picked up the papers, flipped through them with calm efficiency. "Well," I said, setting them down. "At least we're finally honest." That rattled her. "You're not even surprised." "No." Her voice rose, betraying the fragile veneer of control. "You really think you're just going to walk away and I'm going to let you? That I'll make this easy?" "I don't need it to be easy," I said, folding the papers neatly. "I just needed it to be done." She looked stunned. This was supposed to shake me. This was her final dramatic move to elicit an emotional reaction. A fight, a plea, anything to prove I still cared. I gave a small, hollow smile. "You've already taken everything you could. There's nothing left to shake." That was when her face changed. The performance cracked. Her hands trembled slightly. "It wasn't supposed to get this far," she whispered. "I thought, what?" "Yes. That I'd beg you to stay. Cry. Break. That you'd fight for me." She shook her head, confusion warring with fear. "I thought." I shook my head. I fought quietly for months while you were slipping away piece by piece. I fought for this marriage every time I let something slide. Every time I trusted your lies. Every time I stayed silent and swallowed my doubt. She stepped forward, eyes brimming. And now you just give up. No, I said, the quiet certainty of my voice overwhelming her rising panic. I'm just finally matching your effort. She blinked fast, trying to stop the tears from rising. But I wasn't done. I walked to the cabinet, pulled out a second stack of papers, my own. Already signed. Damp. Ready. I placed them beside hers. She stared, mouth open, looking from her dramatic, aggressive petition to my neat, calm, fully processed one. I've been ready, I said softly. That silence stretched long, longer than either of us could stand. Then she snapped. Her hand reached out, sweeping both stacks of paper, hers and mine, to the floor with a crash. This was never real to you, was it? She screamed, tears finally starting to fall. You're enjoying this, watching me fall apart. I didn't flinch. No. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it happening. She dropped to her knees, started grabbing pages, tearing them apart with shaking, pathetic hands. This was supposed to be a warning, she sobbed, the truth finally spilling out. Not a real thing. I didn't mean it. I crouched, picked up one page she'd missed. My signature still clean across the bottom. You keep thinking everything is a negotiation, I said, holding the paper. A threat or a reward. That's why you cheated. That's why you're tearing up these papers. But I already signed the contract. It's over. The kitchen floor, covered in torn legal papers. Julia is on her knees, hyperventilating. Noah remains perfectly controlled. The sound of ripping paper is juxtaposed with the quiet hum of the house. She was on the floor, surrounded by the physical evidence of our failure, trying to destroy the papers as if destroying the document could stop the inevitable. Her sobs were raw, messy, and loud. The kind of breakdown she'd always been capable of, but had never allowed me to truly witness until now. I watched her for a moment. Not with pity, but with a detached fascination, like observing a chemical reaction. This wasn't genuine remorse for the cheating. This was the grief of a manipulator whose subject had ceased to be manageable. Get up, Julia, I said, my voice cutting through her noise, devoid of compromise. She shook her head violently, clutching a torn half of the divorce petition. No, I won't let you do this to me. You did this to yourself, I corrected. I walked to the utility closet and pulled out a small, sturdy suitcase, an old carry-on I rarely used. I placed it on the kitchen table, the simple act a physical manifestation of my next move. She finally looked up, her face streaked with mascara and tears, a look of panicked disbelief. What is that? A suitcase, I replied. You can put a week's worth of clothes in it. Essentials. We can handle the rest later. You're kicking me out, she whispered, the shock replacing the hysteria. I'm giving you space, I said, walking towards the bedroom. Space to realize that this is not a tantrum you can wait out. And space for me to start moving my life forward. She scrambled to her feet, following me to the bedroom, leaving the scattered papers behind. But this is my home too. You don't have the right. I turned, already pulling clothes from the dresser. My clothes, folding them neatly. Legally, no. But morally. I've bought you the space to lie for months. I've bought you the luxury of silence. Now you get the consequence. I picked up her jacket, the one she'd grabbed that first night she lied, still hanging over a chair. I tossed it onto the bed. Go stay with Emma. Or a friend. Take a week. But you need to leave tonight. She stood there, frozen, watching me fold my socks. The domesticity of the moment was jarring against the brutality of the words. You won't even give me a second chance. I gave you months of second chances, I said without looking up. Every day I didn't check your phone. Every night I let you come home and lie to my face. That was my way of giving you the chance to tell me the truth. You chose the performance instead. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately looking for an angle, a weakness. She needed an audience, a referee. She grabbed her phone and held it up, her hand shaking. "I'm calling my mother. I'm calling a lawyer. You can't just throw me out." "Call them," I agreed, walking past her to the bathroom to gather my toiletries. "Tell them you were having an affair and your husband, after weeks of quiet observation, decided to dissolve the marriage cleanly and without vengeance, but only after you filed first in a desperate attempt to claim control." I paused, meeting her eyes over the edge of the medicine cabinet mirror. "Tell them I'm not angry. Tell them I'm just indifferent. That's the part they'll understand the least." She lowered the phone, her resolve crumbling. The indifference was the most terrifying weapon I wielded. It stripped away her ability to be the victim. "Why are you doing this to me?" she whispered, the question laced with genuine pain, the self-pity finally overwhelming the anger. I stepped out of the bathroom, zipping the small bag of toiletries. "I'm doing this for me, Julia. I'm preserving the last sliver of dignity I have left, and I'm ensuring my future is not built on your unstable foundation." I walked back to the kitchen, picked up the travel bag, and placed it on the counter near the door. The simple final gesture. "I'm going to Josh's for the night," I stated. "I need you gone before I get back tomorrow afternoon. I don't want a confrontation. I don't want a tearful goodbye. Just clean logistics." She followed me to the door, suddenly desperate for an explanation, something she could understand, something she could fight against. "Was he better?" she asked suddenly, her voice raw, sharp, a purely defensive, feminine challenge. "The other man, was that what this was about? You felt neglected, so you needed proof you could still be desired." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. This was the moment for the final, brutal truth. "You really still don't get it," I said, shaking my head. "The affair. It was a symptom, Julia. Not the disease. I didn't check out because you cheated. You cheated because we were already finished, and you needed a distraction from the silence." I turned, leaning against the doorframe. "You need drama. You need to be needed desperately." I was stable. I was quiet. I was a man who loved you steadily and reliably. And that terrified you because it meant you couldn't control me through emotional highs and lows. The stability meant you had to look at yourself, and you didn't like what you saw. Her mouth trembled. "That's not true. I wanted a connection. You were emotionally unavailable." "I was available," I corrected gently. "But I wasn't volatile. I wasn't a game. I wasn't the instructor pushing you to the edge of your limits. I was a safe harbor. And you, Julia, you are an ocean storm. You thrive on the chaos. You used the affair to create a new narrative, a new crisis, so you could feel important again. So you could feel real." I opened the door, letting the cool evening air flow into the suddenly hot, suffocating space. "You broke this marriage not with your body, but with your need for a story." I stepped out onto the porch. "When I come back tomorrow," I said, my voice completely flat, "I expect you to be gone. Take the car. I'll get a rental. Just leave the keys in the kitchen." She just stood there in the doorway, the light from inside illuminating the devastating wreckage of her face. She didn't move, didn't argue. She just watched me walk away. Not with fury, but with the hollow realization that the person she was watching leave wasn't the man she thought she could control. He was a stranger she had created. Josh's bar, late evening. It's quiet, the air thick with stale beer and low music. Josh and Noah are sitting at the bar, nursing whiskeys. I drove to Josh's bar, not because I needed refuge, but because I needed neutral ground, a space where the air hadn't been poisoned by months of quiet deception. Josh was wiping down the counter when I walked in. He looked at my small travel bag, then at my face. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and poured me a drink. "Neat. Looks like you finally stopped patching the leak," he observed, his voice low and weary, already knowing the complexity of the situation. "I decided to let the wall fall down," I said, taking a slow, deep breath of the whiskey fumes. "It's faster than chasing the decay." We sat there for a long time, the silence comfortable and healing. It wasn't the surgical silence I used with Julia. This was the silence of two friends who understood the weight of unsaid things. She always had a flair for the dramatic, Josh finally said, tilting his head. Didn't she? She thrives on it, I agreed. She wanted me to be furious. She wanted to fight, to scream, to see me hurt. That would have given her control. It would have meant I still cared enough to engage in her chaos. And you didn't, Josh noted. I couldn't, I clarified. The anger burned out weeks ago. Once I knew the truth, there was nothing left but logistics. Divorce is just the final debugging process for a failed system. Josh scoffed, a dry, small sound. You sound like a robot, man. I had to be, I admitted, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. I had to be absolutely, perfectly calm to execute the plan. Any shred of emotion, any sign of hurt, and she would have weaponized it. She would have stalled, begged, played the victim. My indifference was the only way to make the exit immediate and non-negotiable. We talked late into the night. It wasn't advice he gave me, just perspective. He talked about his own messy divorce 5 years prior, the shouting matches, the legal battles over furniture, the lingering bitterness. You know what the hardest part was, Noah? He asked, leaning in, his voice dropping. It wasn't the loss of the relationship. It was the loss of control. The feeling that someone you loved suddenly had the power to redefine your reality. I understand that feeling, I said, thinking about Julia's sudden panicky decision to file her own papers, just to be the one to initiate the inevitable. You managed to avoid the chaos, Josh observed, finishing his drink. But it came at a price. You locked yourself away emotionally. You became the watcher, the data collector. You sacrificed the opportunity to grieve in exchange for a clean victory. It's not a victory, I countered. It's a containment. I contained the damage. If I had let myself feel the pain, I would have lost focus. I would have yelled, and she would have used that fight to prove I was the unstable one. This way, I walked away with my dignity intact and the terms set. Josh looked at me, a genuine sorrow in his eyes. Dignity is a lonely victory, my friend. I smiled faintly, but it was humorless. Better lonely than complicit in the lie. He poured us both another drink without asking. So, what's the plan now? Just wait until tomorrow and walk into an empty house. I go back, I said, staring at the condensation dripping down my glass. I confirm she's gone. Change the codes. And I start filling the silence with my life, not the noise of her performance. Around 3 a.m., the last customer left. Josh locked the door, and the bar went silent. He let me crash on the small, lumpy couch in the back office. Lying there, surrounded by dusty files and the smell of industrial cleaner, I thought about the house. The stucco exterior, the sun-faded shutters. The place I had fought so hard to keep stable. Julia had called it her home, too. But what did that word mean? To me, home was quiet predictability. The certainty that the person next to you was who they claimed to be. To Julia, home was the stage. The place where the performance of domestic bliss could be convincingly executed, giving her the emotional validation she craved, while the real action, the excitement, happened off-set. I realized then that I wasn't just divorcing her. I was divorcing the illusion. The quiet, constant pretense of normalcy that had masked a deep, fundamental mismatch between two people. She needed turmoil. I needed peace. And peace, in her eyes, was abandonment. I drifted off just as the first weak light of dawn began to filter through the grimy window. I slept deep and dreamless, the first truly restful sleep I'd had in months. The absence of anxiety was a powerful sedative. I woke up late, showered in Josh's cramped staff bathroom, and left the bar feeling clear-headed and ready. Not excited, not relieved, but ready. I drove back to the house slowly, rehearsing the movements in my mind. Check the key hook. Look for the note. Confirm the bag is gone. The drive was short, but the anticipation was a heavy presence in the car. It wasn't fear of what I might find. It was the lingering fear of the confrontation I had so deliberately avoided. I pulled up to the driveway. The green sedan was gone. I parked and walked to the front door. The house looked exactly the same. Unchanged. But I knew the chemistry inside was fundamentally different. Open the door. The immediate wave of silence hit me. It wasn't the surgical silence I'd manufactured in her presence. This was a deep, resonant, empty silence. The house breathed differently without her. I walked to the kitchen. The counter was clean. The suitcase was gone. On the kitchen island, next to the ceramic key dish, was a set of keys. House keys, her car keys, and a note, folded neatly. Picked up the note. Her handwriting was familiar, looping, elegant. I unfolded it slowly, expecting a final desperate plea, a venomous attack, or another lie. It simply read. I left the papers, the ones I tore up, in the recycling bin. I'm sorry you made me feel so small. I reread the last line. I'm sorry you made me feel so small. Not I'm sorry I betrayed you. Not I'm sorry for what I did to us. The apology was still centered entirely on her perception of herself. She was the victim of my clarity. She was the one diminished by my indifference. Even in her final written words, she couldn't take true accountability. It was a beautiful, devastating piece of final data. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling bin, retrieving the torn legal papers and placing them in a new file folder. Exhibit A. Failure to take responsibility. The house was empty. The air was clean. The rebuilding could finally begin. A quiet victory was mine. The house afternoon. Empty quiet. The sunlight streams through the windows, highlighting dust motes dancing in the newly silent air. Noah begins the task of cleaning and redefining the space. I stood in the center of the kitchen, holding the new file folder that contained the remnants of our divorce. The initial shock of the empty house had passed, replaced by a strange, almost clinical sense of purpose. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a project. A system that needed to be cleaned, debugged, and restored to its original functional state. My first act was administrative. I went straight to the garage, retrieved the spare key to Julia's car that she'd left behind, and immediately called the dealership. I arranged for it to be towed and transferred to her sister, Emma, the safest, most neutral way to pass on the asset. Then I changed the access codes on the front door, the garage, and the Wi-Fi. Every shared connection, physical or digital, had to be severed. The physical separation was done. Now the emotional decontamination had to start. I began with the bedroom. It was still filled with the scents and textures of her recent presence. A faint trace of that expensive perfume, the faint chemical smell of her specialized shampoo. I stripped the bed, pulled every towel from the bathroom, and started load after load of laundry, washing away every last physical trace of her. It wasn't a furious cleaning. It was methodical, controlled. Each action was a small, incremental step towards reclaiming my own territory. I was deleting the files that had corrupted the system. I walked into her side of the closet. The colorful dresses, the expensive shoes, the untouched gym gear. All of it a costume from a life I didn't recognize. I didn't touch her clothes. That would be messy, emotional. I just stared at them, cataloging the inventory. She'd need to arrange for a moving company. I wouldn't do it for her. I wasn't her facilitator anymore. I went into the living room, retrieved the TV remote, and turned on the late-night rerun she'd interrupted that first night. I turned the sound up. Loud. Not angry loud, but simply present loud. The sound of my choice filling the space. I realized then that for months, I had listened not to the television or the music or the sounds of the house, but to the constant underlying hum of her performance. The tiny shifts in her voice, the pauses, the feigned spontaneity. It was exhausting noise. Now there was just the flat, predictable sound of a sitcom laugh track. It was peaceful. I sat on the couch, where she had once tried to lure me with a false promise of intimacy, and simply existed. The silence wrapped around me, no longer heavy with suspicion, but light with freedom. I didn't try to think deep thoughts. I didn't try to analyze the why one more time. I simply allowed myself to be. To breathe the air I hadn't realized was stale until now. After the laundry was done, I walked through the rest of the house, pausing at the small items she had left behind. A fancy hand lotion on the bathroom counter, a hair tie on the nightstand, a forgotten magazine on the coffee table. I didn't throw them out in a fit of pique. I gathered them in a shoebox, taping it shut and writing "Julia, contents" on the side in black marker. I placed the box by the front door, a monument to the practical, rather than emotional, end of our life together. Then I focused on our photos. There weren't many. We were never a couple obsessed with public display. A few framed pictures on the mantelpiece. Our wedding day, a trip to the coast, a holiday picture with Emma. I took them down one by one. I didn't smash them. I didn't burn them. I simply removed the pictures from the frames, stacked the glass and wood neatly in a pile for reuse, and placed the photographs themselves into a separate envelope. As I looked at the picture of our wedding, I didn't feel sadness or anger. I felt the cold, hard logic of an auditing firm reviewing bad financials. The smiles were real at the time. The promises were based on good intentions. The execution failed due to poor long-term structural integrity. The process of taking down the photos was a ritual of release. I wasn't erasing the memories. I was retiring them, moving them from the active file to the archive. They were data points that once mattered, but no longer dictated the future. The sun set, the house darkened, and the familiar ache of routine started to surface. This was the time we would usually decide on dinner. The time she would enter the kitchen demanding a decision, or me ordering Thai food based on her preferences. This time I was alone. I opened the fridge. Only my half-gallon of milk and a few forlorn condiments remained. Julia had taken all her specialty items. The physical separation was starkly clear. I didn't order in. I didn't want the ghost of pad thai or the taste of what was ours clinging to my palate. I drove to the supermarket. I bought simple things. Bread, coffee beans, a single serving steak. My food. I paid for it with my card, carried the bags and cooked a meal, just for me. The sound of the sizzling steak on the pan, the aroma of fresh coffee brewing for the morning, the quiet clinking of the cutlery on a single plate. It was mundane. It was simple. It was mine. I ate standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the dark window at the reflection of the quiet room. I tasted the steak, savoring the flavor that wasn't chosen to placate someone else's desire. It was the loneliest meal I had eaten in years, but also the most authentic. Later, as I got into the now empty vast bed, I didn't sleep on her side or mine. I slept directly in the middle, sprawled out, taking up all the space, no longer needing to feel the rhythm of her breathing, or anticipate her shift. I was finally truly alone. And it felt like the first night I had slept with myself in a very long time. The system was rebooting. Weeks later. The house is sterile, almost too neat. Noah is in his home office, staring at the complex, messy legal forms that have replaced the easy certainty of code. The weeks that followed were a blur of procedural solitude. The initial rush of getting it done had faded, leaving behind the long, tedious work of disentanglement. The quiet of the house, initially a relief, began to feel vast and demanding. It was a vacuum I had to consciously fill every day. I went back to work. Writing back-end code felt strangely comforting now. Code followed logic. Code didn't lie. Code, when debugged, ran cleanly. Divorce, however, was less predictable. Mitchell Green, my lawyer, was excellent. He managed the correspondence, sending my clean, signed petition and a notice for her to retrieve her remaining property. He stressed the importance of remaining emotionally invisible to Julia. She will try to elicit a response, Noah, Mitchell warned me over the phone. Anger, regret, anything. That's her leverage. Do not give her a reason to claim emotional distress or instability. Keep everything in writing. Keep it brief. Keep it legal. I followed his advice meticulously. Every email from her, usually a clipped, hostile request for a specific item, was forwarded to Mitchell, who replied with a measured logistical response. Julia arranged to have a moving crew come on a Saturday. I deliberately scheduled a trip to see Josh that day, refusing to be present for the final extraction. I didn't want the performance of farewell, or the chance encounter that would reignite her manipulative engine. But even my absence couldn't stop the emotional residue. When I returned that evening, the house was physically empty of her possessions. Her side of the closet was bare. The walls where her framed art had hung were marked with faint, rectangular shadows. But the void she left behind was louder than any of her lies. I found a small, antique silver locket on the floor under the bed, something I didn't even recognize. It was trivial, easily missed. But the sight of it triggered a momentary, sharp pang. Not of love or loss, but of nostalgia for the idea of what we had. The initial hope. The quiet commitment I had genuinely believed in. Picked it up. It was cold, heavy. I could have thrown it away. But instead I carefully added it to the Julia contents box by the door, now scheduled for pickup by her moving company. I wouldn't let even this small, forgotten item drag me back into sentimentality. I processed it like a piece of lost baggage. The real challenge wasn't facing Julia, but facing myself in this new environment. One evening I found myself in the grocery store, automatically reaching for the brand of specialty coffee she liked, the one I had stopped drinking months ago. I paused, my hand hovering over the familiar red label. That's when it hit me. The loss wasn't the spectacular, dramatic betrayal. The loss was the erosion of my own identity. I had spent so long adapting to her wants, her schedule, her routines, that my own preferences had faded into the background. I pulled my hand back, grabbing a bag of plain, dark roast. My preference rediscovered. I realized that Julia didn't just cheat on me. She had forced me to cheat on myself. I had compromised my intuition, ignored my evidence, and quieted my inner voice, all in a desperate, futile attempt to maintain an impossible peace. The pain, when it finally arrived, wasn't a fire of anger, but a slow, heavy ache of regret for the time lost. The 2 years I spent living in a system I knew was compromised. I knew that in the long term, maintaining an adversarial relationship with Julia's family would only prolong the misery. And I genuinely cared about Emma. She had paid a high price for her conscience. I sent her a brief, neutral text. "The car is being transferred to you. Use it, sell it, whatever you need." No need to reply. She did reply instantly. "Noah, thank you. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry about everything. Don't be," I wrote back. "You told me the truth when it mattered. That's what I needed." "She's a mess," Emma wrote. "She's staying with my mom. She keeps talking about how cold you are. How this is all your fault for giving up." "Let her have her narrative," I replied, finally feeling the emotional truth of the indifference I had manufactured. "Have my peace." That small exchange felt like the final severing of the toxic thread. I had preserved the one genuine relationship that had crossed the line of fire. The paperwork moved slowly, but surely. Julia, stripped of her audience and her leverage, eventually signed the final separation agreement. She didn't fight over the assets, only demanding a larger share of the furniture, the props of their shared performance, which I conceded without argument. It wasn't worth the emotional cost of the battle. Months after the initial confrontation, I found myself back in Mitchell Green's office. The papers were ready for the final dissolution decree. "This is it, Noah," Mitchell said, sliding the thick folder across the desk. "It's official. You are no longer legally married." Picked up the pen. It wasn't the tense, decisive moment of the initial petition. This time it was just bureaucracy. Formality. The marriage had been over the moment she walked in the door, and I saw the lie in her eyes. The legal process was just catching up to the emotional reality. I signed the last document. The final, clean, non-negotiable end. Mitchell shook my hand. "You handled this with a grace and control I rarely see. Most people fall apart." "I did fall apart," I said, putting the pen down. "I just did it quietly weeks ago, and used the pieces to build a shield." I walked out of the law office and into the street. The afternoon was bright and loud, full of the hurried energy of the city. I was officially single. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel relief. I felt a deep, quiet, profound sense of emptiness. The structure was gone. The battle was won, but the land was scorched. I stood there for a moment, letting the feeling wash over me. Then I pulled out my phone. Not to call anyone, but to look at a calendar. I needed to decide what my next move would be. What my next system would look like. I was a man with a blank slate, a quiet house, and the daunting freedom of an utterly uncertain future. The silence was mine, but now I had to figure out what to do with it. 1 year later. The house is completely renovated, not lavishly but structurally redefined. The walls are painted in cool, neutral tones. The living room is now a minimal, intentional space. Noah is sitting in a newly designed home office, looking out the window. A year had passed since the divorce was finalized. A year of navigating the quiet, sometimes frightening landscape of solitude. The initial emptiness of the house had slowly been filled, not with new possessions, but with intention. I had ripped up the dusty green lawn and installed a simple rock garden, low maintenance, uncluttered and resilient. The interior was painted in colors that reflected my personality, cool blues and grays, not the warm, inviting hues Julia had chosen to facilitate her performance of domesticity. The house was no longer a stage. It was a sanctuary. The legal battle was over, the physical separation complete. But the real work was the system rebuild inside my head. I went back to basics. I started running not for fitness but for the clarity of effort. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement became the new metronome for my life, replacing the silent, anxious tick of suspicion. I found a new hobby, woodworking. It was slow, measured, and demanded patience and precision, qualities I deeply respected and needed to re-engage. Each project, a small shelf, a coffee table, was a physical manifestation of building something solid and real with my own hands, and my relationship with Josh strengthened. He became a steady anchor, someone I could talk to without having to analyze their motives. I started dating again eventually, but I approached connection with the same clinical honesty I had used to end my marriage. I wasn't looking for drama or distraction, or a replacement for Julia. I was looking for alignment. I learned to recognize the subtle cues I had ignored before. The overcompensating smile. Casual self-serving lie. The subtle attempts to manage my reactions. When I saw the signs of performance, I didn't get angry. I simply disengaged. I had learned the hard lesson that indifference wasn't just a weapon against a liar. It was a filter for authenticity. I understood now that Julia had taught me a valuable, brutal lesson. I was susceptible to being lied to because I valued peace over truth. I confused the absence of conflict with the presence of happiness. I changed my internal code. Truth, however messy, is always preferable to a comfortable lie. I rarely thought about Julia, but when I did, the memories were detached, like scenes from a movie I'd long since finished watching. I knew, through Emma's occasional brief updates, that Julia was still struggling, still cycling through crises. She had lost the car, left her mother's house, and was still blaming my coldness for her instability. She hadn't changed because she hadn't faced the core problem. She was still obsessed with the narrative, the story where she was the passionate, misunderstood victim of a rigid, unfeeling man. I didn't begrudge her the story. It was the only way she could cope. But I was no longer an actor in her drama. I was the audience who had walked out during the first act. I sat in my new office chair, the afternoon sun warm on my face. On the clean, uncluttered desk, next to my laptop, was a small, plain wooden box I had crafted myself. Inside were the archived photographs, the crumpled note, and the initial decree. The physical records of a finished project. The final piece of the system rebuild was the emotional acceptance of responsibility for my own mistakes. The quiet ones. I hadn't cheated. I hadn't lied. But I had been a passive participant in a dying marriage. I had allowed the fear of confrontation to supersede the need for honesty. I had watched the deterioration and stayed silent, hoping the problem would debug itself. Never does. I closed the wooden box. The sound was soft, final. My life now wasn't filled with spectacular highs, but it was grounded in a deep, unshakable foundation of self-respect and authenticity. I was writing my own code now, clean, functional, and efficient. I stood up, stretched, and walked over to the window. The world outside was busy, chaotic, full of noise and light. I was ready to engage with it, not as a silent observer, but as a stable, certain participant. I didn't win the divorce. I won back myself. I open my laptop, the screen lighting up. Time to build the next sequence. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If you've ever felt the quiet truth of betrayal or the need to reclaim your silence, I hope my story gives you the strength to start your own rebuild. You don't need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes the coldest certainty is the most powerful force. Would you like me to find some resources on emotional recovery or legal separation, or summarize the key emotional arcs of the script?